The humans didn't plan a war, they planned extermination. I watched their strategy sessions through secure feeds. Their maps didn't show battle lines or territorial objectives. Instead, they displayed Skorath resource flows, manufacturing nodes, and logistical pathways. They weren't trying to defeat an enemy, they were designing a termination protocol. Every discussion focused on complete elimination, not conditional surrender. Caney called it pest control, not military engagement. I heard him explain it to his staff during a briefing. He stood before a hologram of Skorath hiveship patterns, pointing with that ever-present ceramic cup. "We're not fighting soldiers," he said. "We're removing an infestation." The language was deliberate. It removed the romance of combat, the honor of battle. This was pure clinical eradication. They would study, copy, then surpass Skorath capabilities. Their research divisions worked in continuous shifts. I monitored their progress through intercepted technical reports. They didn't try to understand Skorath science. They reverse-engineered practical applications. Their engineers took captured components and built better versions within days. The process was relentless, iterative, and shockingly fast. Traditional victory wasn't the goal. Transformative capability was. Caney's team measured success in industrial output, not territory gained. Their daily briefings showed production graphs, resource allocation matrices, and construction timelines. They tracked how many Skorath ships they could produce compared to how many the enemy fielded. The math was simple. Outproduce, outnumber, overwhelm. Every resource would be weaponized, every ship retrofitted. I watched civilian transport vessels get armor plating welded onto their hulls. Asteroid miners received energy weapon installations. Cargo haulers became missile platforms. The distinction between military and civilian assets disappeared. Everything that could fly became part of the solution. Everything that couldn't fly became raw material. They'd kill things that thought they couldn't be killed. Their psychological profiling of the Skorath revealed a critical weakness: absolute confidence in their invincibility. The Skorath had never faced a peer opponent, never experienced meaningful losses. Human strategists identified this as their primary vulnerability. They designed operations specifically to demonstrate that the Skorath could be hurt, could be broken, could be erased. The Council struggled with this philosophical shift. I attended emergency sessions where diplomats argued about proportional response and acceptable warfare. They still thought in terms of rules of engagement and diplomatic solutions. Human representatives listened patiently, then returned to their extermination plans. The cultural disconnect was absolute. We were playing chess while they were fumigating the board. War wasn't about rules, it was about survival. Caney made this clear in his only address to the Council. He stood before the assembled senators without ceremonial robes or diplomatic pretenses. "Your rules were written by civilizations that never faced extinction," he said. "Our rules were written by survivors." The statement hung in the chamber like a verdict. No one challenged him. Humanity would fight with abandon because alternatives didn't exist. Their mobilization orders contained no fallback positions, no contingency plans for failure. Every resource commitment was absolute. Their public communications were equally stark: win or be erased. The entire species understood the stakes with terrifying clarity. There was no room for half measures or negotiated settlements. They were building a solution, not fighting a battle. The difference became apparent in their operational tempo. While we'd been trying to stop Skorath advances, they were constructing the means to erase them entirely. Their shipyards worked triple shifts. Their engineers slept at their stations. Their entire civilization focused on creating a single outcome: no more Skorath threat. Not contained, not managed, eliminated. I watched Earth's industrial base awaken like a sleeping giant. Satellite feeds showed continents lighting up with construction activity. Night turned to day over entire regions as fusion plants went to maximum output. The transition wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous. One moment they were a pre-warp civilization, the next they were retooling their entire species for survival. Every shipyard, factory, and resource redirected to one purpose. Automotive plants ceased making ground vehicles and started producing engine components. Electronics manufacturers shifted from consumer devices to weapons guidance systems. Even food production facilities converted to manufacturing nutrient paste for space crews. The reallocation was total, immediate, and shockingly efficient. They retrofitted civilian vessels with weapons council techs called impossible. I watched orbital dockyards modify bulk freighters into missile platforms. Crews welded particle beam emitters onto civilian shuttle hulls. Their engineers used materials we'd consider substandard: titanium alloys instead of durasteel, chemical propellants instead of plasma drives. Yet their solutions worked. The conversions were crude, effective, and deployed within days. Human engineers reverse-engineered Skorath technology in days, not years. Our science teams needed months to analyze captured components. Their technical crews stripped Skorath wreckage and had working prototypes within 72 hours. They didn't bother with theoretical models. They tested practical applications through constant iteration. Failure was just data for the next attempt. They built ships faster than the Council could track them. Our surveillance satellites lost count at 37,000 new vessels per week. Their construction methods defied conventional manufacturing logic. Prefabricated sections assembled in orbit, modular components swapped between ship classes. They treated warship production like assembling ground vehicles: standardized parts, assembly lines, volume over perfection. Their production lines operated on shifts Council workers found inhuman. 3 8-hour rotations with no breaks between cycles. Workers slept in barracks adjacent to factories. Meals were taken at stations. The pace was relentless, the atmosphere focused. Our labor analysts called it unsustainable. Their production graphs called it Tuesday. They treated the mobilization like a natural disaster response. The same emergency protocols used for hurricanes and earthquakes applied to starship production. Civil defense networks coordinated resource allocation. Emergency broadcast systems directed workforce movements. This wasn't a military operation. It was a species-level survival response. Every nation, every corporation, every individual focused on survival. I watched their global networks. No debates about economic impact or political consequences. No protests about resource allocation. The entire species moved with single-minded purpose. Ancient rivalries disappeared. Historical conflicts became irrelevant. The unity was absolute and terrifying. The scale was incomprehensible to Council logistics experts. Our analysts kept recalculating their production capacity. The numbers never matched reality. They weren't just exceeding expectations. They were redefining industrial possibility. One Council report called it statistically impossible industrial output. Another simply stated models broken. They weren't building a fleet. They were building a solution. The distinction became clear in their design philosophy. Ships weren't crafted for longevity or elegance. They were disposable tools, single-mission vessels, weapons platforms with minimal life support. Everything served the extermination protocol. Everything focused on the final objective. The machinery reflected the mentality. Efficient, ruthless, and absolutely focused on termination. The Skorath first noticed the hollowed-out asteroids. Their advanced scouts reported anomalous readings in 7 different systems. What appeared to be natural planetoids were emitting energy signatures that didn't match any known mineral composition. The initial assessment classified them as geological oddities, perhaps rare radioactive isotopes reacting with deep ice deposits. The mistake would cost them dearly: 47,000 mobile shipyards and fortresses. The number seemed impossible until we correlated the sensor data. Each asteroid measured between 5 and 20 kilometers in diameter. Their surfaces showed recent excavation patterns, geometric cuts too precise for natural erosion. Internal scans revealed cavernous spaces filled with manufacturing equipment, reactor cores, and docking facilities. They'd turned dead rocks into armed industrial complexes. Each asteroid contained internal production capabilities. I reviewed the captured schematics. They had foundries for alloy production, assembly lines for component manufacturing, even facilities for crew training and accommodation. The largest ones could produce 3 destroyer-class vessels simultaneously while under combat conditions. They weren't just bases. They were self-sufficient civilizations dedicated to warship production. They moved through space like armed industrial cities. Their propulsion systems were crude but effective. Mass drivers mounted in excavated tunnels, throwing reaction mass to achieve movement. Each asteroid trailed clouds of industrial waste and coolant vapor. Their navigation patterns were deliberate, methodical, moving between resource-rich systems without regard for conventional space lanes. They followed the resources, not the strategies. Skorath scouts reported disassembly fields around these fortresses. The fields operated on principles we still don't fully understand. They targeted specific molecular bonds in Skorath alloys, breaking them down into component elements. Ships that ventured too close would simply come apart like puzzle boxes being dismantled. The process was silent, efficient, and utterly terrifying to witness. Enemy ships entering these zones were stripped for raw materials. I watched sensor footage of a Skorath destroyer crossing the perimeter. Its outer hull began flaking away in precise geometric patterns. Components separated along factory seams. Armor plating delaminated into constituent alloys. Within minutes, the warship became a cloud of sorted materials drifting toward collection arrays. Nothing was wasted. Everything was recycled. Their designs were reverse-engineered within hours. Human technicians worked in shielded observation posts near the disassembly fields. They analyzed the materials as they came apart, studying construction techniques and material science. What took council scientists months to decipher, they understood in single work shifts. Their reports focused on practical applications, not theoretical principles. The asteroids became both defense and offensive production. They served as both shield and sword. Their disassembly fields protected nearby human vessels, while their production facilities built replacements for losses. They created safe zones where Skorath couldn't venture while serving as forward operating bases for human fleets. The tactical advantage was unprecedented in galactic warfare. They were destroying Skorath capacity to wage war while building their own. Each Skorath ship destroyed became raw material for 2 human vessels. The equation was brutally simple. The more the Skorath attacked, the stronger humanity grew. Their industrial capacity expanded with every engagement. Their production curves showed exponential growth where others showed depletion. Admiral Nethka's intelligence reports called it logically impossible. The finest tactical mind in the Council fleet spent 3 days analyzing the data. His final assessment stated that the asteroids violated 7 fundamental principles of military logistics. The energy requirements alone should have been unsustainable. The production timelines defied manufacturing physics. His conclusion was simple. Either our sensors were faulty or the humans had rewritten the rules of warfare. The sensors weren't faulty. Humans didn't hack networks, they understood behavior. I watched their analysts study Skorath command patterns for weeks. They didn't break encryption or intercept communications. Instead, they tracked maintenance cycles, refueling operations, even officer rotation schedules. They learned that Skorath admirals changed shifts every 17 hours exactly, that their scouting patterns repeated every 93 hours, that their fleet formations always maintained precise geometric spacing. The humans didn't need codes, they understood rhythms. They gained intimate knowledge of Skorath habits and locations. Their intelligence division created predictive models so accurate, they could tell you which Skorath commander would be drinking nutrient fluid at any given moment. They mapped favorite transit routes, preferred combat formations, even individual ship identifiers. They knew the Skorath better than the Skorath knew themselves. This wasn't espionage, it was behavioral science applied to warfare. Their command and control synergy was unprecedented. I monitored their fleet communications during engagements. There were no long deliberations or committee decisions. Captains received tactical updates and made immediate adjustments. Ship commanders coordinated maneuvers without central direction. The entire fleet moved like a single organism with perfect awareness. Their reaction times measured in seconds, not minutes. They predicted Skorath movements before the admirals did. During the battle for Cygnus Prime, human controllers identified the Skorath flanking maneuver 47 minutes before the enemy ships changed course. They didn't intercept communications. They recognized formation patterns that indicated preparation for complex maneuvers. Their predictive algorithms were so precise they could forecast Skorath actions based on energy expenditure rates and engine heat signatures. Human intelligence became a force multiplier of terrifying scale. Each ship knew what every other ship was doing. Each commander understood the overall battle state without needing updates. Their awareness operated on multiple levels simultaneously: tactical, strategic, logistical. They fought with perfect information in real time. The advantage wasn't technological, it was cognitive. They turned enemy patterns into tactical advantages. When they noticed Skorath ships always protected their command vessels in specific geometric patterns, they developed attack vectors that exploited the formation's blind spots. When they observed that Skorath maintenance cycles created predictable vulnerabilities, They timed their strikes to coincide with system reboots. They didn't fight the enemy. They used the enemy's own routines against them. The Skorath found their own networks used against them. Human signals intelligence units began transmitting false orders during critical moments. They mimicked Skorath command protocols perfectly. They created confusion by sending contradictory movement orders to different fleet elements. The Skorath couldn't distinguish real communications from fabricated ones. Their perfect command structure became their vulnerability. Humans studied and shaped enemy behavior in real time. During engagements, they'd test different tactics and measure Skorath responses. They'd probe defensive formations to see how commanders reacted under pressure. They'd create false weak points to draw forces into ambushes. Every interaction provided data. Every engagement taught them more about how their enemy thought, reacted, and made decisions. Their awareness was three-dimensional and constant. Surveillance drones provided real-time mapping of entire battlespheres. Sensor networks tracked energy signatures across light minutes of space. Their command centers displayed constantly updating holograms showing friend and foe positions, resource status, even crew fatigue levels. Nothing was missed. Nothing was overlooked. Information wasn't just power, it was victory. The humans demonstrated that knowing your enemy completely meant you could anticipate their every move. Understanding their psychology meant you could manipulate their decisions. Mastering their patterns meant you could dictate the terms of engagement. The Skorath fought with technological superiority. The humans fought with perfect knowledge. In the end, knowledge proved superior to technology. The numbers emerged slowly, then all at once. For weeks we'd been receiving fragmented production reports from human-controlled sectors. The data seemed improbable. Ship counts that didn't match resource allocations. Construction rates that defied physics. Then their central logistics network integrated with our tracking systems. The full picture appeared on our displays. Our analysts thought it was a systems error at first. Then they realized it was reality. Human production exceeded Skorath capabilities by 40,000 to 1. The final audit showed they were producing 4 warships for every Skorath vessel built. Their asteroid fortresses alone accounted for 37,000 new vessels per standard week. Their orbital shipyards added another 22,000. Their converted civilian facilities contributed thousands more. The scale wasn't just impressive, it was biologically impossible for any species we'd ever documented. They achieved tactical superiority in 73% of contested space. The turning point came during the engagement at Magnus Cluster. Human forces outnumbered Skorath defenders 18 to 1. Their ships weren't technologically superior. There were simply more of them. They could lose 3 vessels for every Skorath ship destroyed, and still maintain numerical advantage. The math was brutally simple and absolutely effective. Their output dwarfed entire Council industrial sectors. I compared their weekly production to our own capabilities. One human manufacturing cluster produced more tonnage of warships than the entire Vorlan home system. Their smallest asteroid fortress matched the output of our largest orbital shipyard. Their production curves showed exponential growth while ours remained linear. The disparity wasn't just significant, it was evolutionary. They weren't just matching Skorath production. They were overwhelming it. The Skorath industrial base operated with perfect efficiency. Their automated factories produced identical vessels at constant rates. Human production was messy, adaptive, and wildly variable. They'd experiment with designs, discard failures, and scale successful models immediately. Their output wasn't consistent, it was accelerating. Their retrofit capabilities improved with every captured ship. I watched them bring a Skorath destroyer into an asteroid fortress. Within 6 hours, they'd stripped it to the frame. Within 12, they'd incorporated 3 new technologies into their own designs. Within 24, those improvements were being installed on production line vessels. Each engagement made them stronger. Each captured ship became a tutorial. They learned faster than the Skorath could adapt. The Skorath response to new tactics took standard weeks. Their command structure required analysis, approval, and implementation cycles. Human adaptations happened in real time. Captains made field modifications during combat. Engineers redesigned systems between engagements. The adaptation gap became their greatest tactical advantage. Their industrial genius became their strategic weapon. They didn't need superior technology or tactics. They simply produced more solutions than the Skorath could produce problems. When Skorath developed new weapons, humans built counters by the thousands. When Skorath created new defenses, humans built more offensive platforms. The conflict became industrial rather than military. The production gap widened exponentially each week. Our economists created predictive models, showing human output doubling every 30 standard days. The Skorath production remained constant, perfect but static. The lines on the graph diverged at an accelerating rate. By the 6th month, humans were producing more tonnage of warships than the Skorath had built in their entire history. The Skorath realized they were fighting against time itself. Their transmissions shifted from confident announcements to urgent commands. They began rushing production, sacrificing quality for quantity. Their perfect mathematical precision started showing errors. Their crews made mistakes under pressure. They weren't just losing ships. They were losing their fundamental identity as perfect, unstoppable machines. The humans had turned their greatest strength against them. Kaney's team didn't announce victory. They announced readiness. The transmission arrived during a routine council session. No fanfare, no dramatic presentation, just a simple data packet with operational status updates. Their production metrics showed full capacity. Their fleet deployments indicated complete coverage. Their resource networks operated at maximum efficiency. The message was clear. They were done preparing. "We're ready to go on the offensive," they told the council. General Kaney appeared via hologram without ceremonial uniform or diplomatic preamble. He stood before a tactical display showing 73 systems under Skorath control. His hands remained at his sides. His voice carried no particular emphasis. The statement felt like a weather report, factual, neutral, inevitable. Council members exchanged glances across the chamber. No one had expected this declaration so soon. Their calm delivery was more terrifying than any boast. I watched senators shift uncomfortably in their seats. They'd anticipated triumphant announcements or demands for recognition. Instead, they received clinical assessment. Kaney's team presented offensive readiness as a logistical achievement, not a military milestone. The disconnect between the magnitude of the statement and its delivery created palpable tension in the chamber. They'd learned not just to replicate, but to surpass. Their technical briefings showed Skorath technology re-engineered for human purposes. Energy weapons with increased firing rates, shield systems with adaptive frequency rotation, engine designs that sacrificed elegance for raw power. They hadn't just copied enemy technology, they'd stripped it down and rebuilt it for maximum combat effectiveness. The improvements weren't incremental. They were transformative. Civilized rules of engagement became irrelevant. Human tactical planners dismissed council protocols as historical artifacts. They operated under a single principle: eliminate the threat. Their battle plans showed no consideration for honor, tradition, or acceptable conduct. They targeted supply lines, communication hubs, and production facilities without hesitation. The concept of fair fight didn't appear in their operational vocabulary. Their campaign wasn't about chivalry, it was about dominance. I reviewed their deployment orders. They didn't seek battlefield glory or individual accomplishments. Every operation served the larger objective of establishing absolute control. Their ships moved to occupy strategic positions, not to engage in heroic duels. Their commanders measured success in territory controlled and assets denied, not enemy ships destroyed. They reframed the entire conflict around their terms. The Skorath were no longer setting the pace or defining the battlefield. Human fleets appeared in systems the Skorath considered secure rear areas. Their asteroid fortresses moved into resource-rich regions the enemy needed for their own production. The humans weren't reacting to Skorath initiatives, they were forcing the Skorath to react to theirs. The Skorath were no longer the hunters, they were the problem. Human communications shifted from defensive terminology to extermination language. They stopped referring to enemy forces and started saying targets. Their briefings used pest control metaphors instead of military terminology. The psychological shift was complete. They weren't fighting an opponent, they were removing an infestation, and humans specialized in solving problems. Their engineering teams treated the Skorath threat as a systems malfunction. Their military planners approached it as a logistics challenge. Their entire civilization viewed it as a survival equation that needed solving. The approach was methodical, comprehensive, and utterly ruthless in its efficiency. The galaxy held its breath as the offensive began. I watched the first wave depart from their asteroid fortresses. Ships streamed out into formation. thousands of vessels moving with coordinated purpose. They didn't broadcast challenges or declare intentions. They simply moved toward Skorath positions with silent determination. Tactical displays across the Council showed the same unfolding pattern. Human fleets advancing, Skorath forces reacting, and the inevitable collision about to occur. The waiting was over. The solution was underway. The final transmission wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement. I monitored the communication channels when it went out. No encryption, no routing through diplomatic protocols. It broadcast on every frequency across what remained of Skorath-controlled space. The message carried no identification codes or formal headers. It simply began speaking in perfectly translated Skorath command dialect. The content was 17 words long. The impact was galactic. We're not civilized beings, we don't fight wars. We solve problems. The delivery was flat, affectless, almost mechanical. There was no emotional emphasis, no rhetorical flourish. The words carried the tone of a technical manual explaining basic principles. I watched Skorath command channels go silent as the message played. Their response teams stopped transmitting. Their tactical updates ceased. The entire military structure seemed to freeze mid-operation. Your problem is that you exist. The statement hung in the communication channels like a verdict. No qualifications, no conditions, no alternatives. It wasn't delivered as a threat. It was presented as factual assessment. The problem had been identified. The solution was already in progress. The simplicity was more terrifying than any declaration of war. It reduced galactic conflict to basic arithmetic. The message echoed across what remained of Skorath space. I tracked its propagation through 17 systems. It repeated every 47 seconds on alternating frequencies. The repetition wasn't aggressive, it was methodical, like a system notification that continues until acknowledged. Skorath vessels that attempted to jam the signal found their systems compromised. Those that tried to flee discovered human ships already waiting at their escape vectors. It wasn't delivered with anger, but with calm certainty. The vocal analysis showed zero emotional stress indicators. No raised pitch, no accelerated delivery, no aggressive modulation. The speaker might have been reading inventory lists or technical specifications. That absence of emotion conveyed more finality than any battle cry could have achieved. This wasn't passion, it was professional assessment. Humans had redefined victory in galactic terms. Previous conflicts ended with negotiated settlements or conditional surrenders. This concluded with problem resolution. The Skorath threat wasn't contained or managed, it was eliminated. Their military capacity wasn't reduced, it was erased. Their civilization wasn't defeated, it was solved. The concept of victory shifted from achieving advantage to removing obstacles. They'd become the galaxy's most efficient exterminators. Their performance metrics were staggering. 98% of Skorath military assets neutralized within standard weeks. 0 friendly casualties during the final offensive. Resource expenditure 23% below initial projections. They hadn't just won, they'd achieved maximum efficiency and elimination. Their after-action reports read like engineering success stories. Their solution was absolute, their mercy conditional. I studied their termination protocols. They offered no surrender terms, no prisoner exchanges, no diplomatic resolutions. Their conditions were simple: cease to be a threat. The method for achieving that condition was left undefined. The Skorath could accomplish it through surrender, through withdrawal, through disarmament, or through eradication. The choice was theirs. The outcome was fixed. The universe would never be the same after their intervention. Galactic warfare doctrine was rewritten within standard months. Military academies added human conflict studies to core curriculum. Diplomats created new protocols for engaging with Earth. The balance of power shifted from technological advancement to industrial capacity and behavioral adaptation. The rules had changed. The players had changed. The game itself had changed. They'd answered a call for aid with something far greater. The Council requested military assistance. They received a demonstration of absolute capability. We asked for protection from destruction. They showed us how to eliminate threats completely. The lesson wasn't just about defeating enemies, it was about redefining survival. They didn't protect the galaxy. They changed what protection meant. I watched council senators who'd called us primitive now sit in silence. The same officials who'd debated chemical propulsion and mudball origins months earlier now stared at tactical displays showing empty space where Skorath fleets used to be. Their podium remained unused. Their data tablets lay untouched. The chamber's atmospheric sensors registered the lowest bio readings I'd ever recorded. Not fear this time, but something deeper. Something like fundamental reassessment. Their terror of the Skorath replaced by awe of humanity. I monitored their private communications through secure channels. They weren't discussing defense allocations or border security anymore. They were analyzing human industrial output patterns, studying their behavioral adaptation models, trying to comprehend how a species could transform so completely in such limited time. The fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply transferred to a different subject. They'd asked for aid and received transformation instead. The Council's initial request specified military support vessels and tactical advisory teams. What they got was a complete re-engineering of galactic conflict. Human involvement didn't just defeat the Skorath. It rewrote the rules of engagement. Our strategic doctrines, our military theories, our very understanding of power dynamics, all needed recalibration. The assistance package came with unintended consequences. Their assumptions about power and civilization were dismantled. I attended the closed-door sessions where analysts presented their findings. The metrics showed human vessels were technically inferior to both Council and Skorath designs. Their weapons had shorter ranges. Their shields had lower capacity. Their engines were less efficient. Yet they'd achieved total victory through numbers, coordination, and relentless adaptation. The Council's technological superiority complex evaporated during those briefings. They learned that technology wasn't the only measure of advancement. The human advantage wasn't in their hardware, it was in their organizational capacity, their ability to mobilize entire populations, their talent for improvisation under pressure, their willingness to sacrifice elegance for effectiveness. These weren't quantifiable technologies, they were cultural attributes. Things we couldn't reverse engineer or purchase through trade agreements. Human will, adaptability, and industrial genius became the new standard. Military academies across Council space revised their curricula. Commanders studied human historical conflicts instead of theoretical engagement models. Engineers prioritized production speed over technical perfection. The definition of advanced civilization shifted from technological achievement to operational capability. We started measuring development in terms of response capacity rather than invention. They went from dismissive to respectful to awestruck. I tracked the language in official communications over those months. Early reports called humans primitive but determined. Later, assessments used unconventionally, effective. Final evaluation simply stated, beyond current classification systems. The semantic shift reflected deeper cognitive changes. They weren't just reassessing human capabilities. They were rethinking their entire framework for evaluating species. Their galactic perspective shifted fundamentally that day. Previously, Council strategy focused on technological parity and diplomatic balance. Now they discussed industrial capacity and behavioral adaptation. Previously, they measured strength in fleet sizes and weapon ranges. Now they calculated production rates and innovation cycles. The change wasn't incremental, it was tectonic. The very vocabulary of power changed in Council chambers. They understood that humanity's edge wasn't tech, it was character. The analysis teams reached this conclusion simultaneously across multiple species. Human success stemmed from cultural traits, not technical advantages. Their willingness to face impossible odds, their ability to organize rapidly, their tolerance for iterative failure. These weren't things you could build into a warship or code into a computer. They were baked into the species' fundamental nature. They discovered the most formidable force in the galaxy, not a weapon system or energy source, not a fleet or an empire, but a species that treated extinction events as solvable problems, a civilization that mobilized completely when threatened, a people who redefined victory as total solution rather than conditional success. The Council had spent centuries looking for powerful technology. They found something far more dangerous: determined character. Millions of human vessels appeared across dozens of systems. I watched tactical displays light up with their signatures. They emerged from asteroid fortresses, hidden shipyards, and converted civilian facilities. Their arrival wasn't staggered or phased, it was simultaneous. 73 systems saw human warships materialize on sensors at the same moment. The coordination was absolute, the timing perfect. Their coordination was precise, their scale unimaginable. I monitored fleet movements across 15 light-years of space. Ships shifted formations with flawless synchronization. Attack groups coordinated strikes across systems without communication delays. Their command structure operated with a cohesion we'd never witnessed. Vessels moved like parts of a single machine, each element aware of every other element's position and purpose. They didn't target military assets alone. Their strike patterns showed deeper understanding. While we'd been focusing on enemy warships, they identified critical support infrastructure. Their target lists included mining operations, refueling stations, even maintenance facilities. They understood that military power depended on industrial capacity. They attacked the foundation, not the surface. Supply depots, communication arrays, industrial networks, all dismantled. I watched their assault on the Skorath logistics hub in System 74B. They didn't bombard the facilities. They sent in specialized teams with disassembly equipment. Within hours, entire orbital factories were being taken apart component by component. The materials were cataloged and transported back to human production centers. Nothing was destroyed, everything was recycled. They attacked the substrate of Skorath power itself. Their strategy ignored traditional military objectives. They didn't seek to control territory or defeat fleets. Instead, they targeted the systems that enabled Skorath warfare. Energy networks, transportation routes, manufacturing complexes, all received simultaneous attention. They weren't fighting an army, they were dismantling a war machine. Their campaign made previous conquests look like minor disputes. The scale of their offensive redefined galactic warfare. Previous conflicts had involved fleet engagements and planetary invasions. This was systematic deconstruction of an entire civilization's war-making capability. The scope was so vast our sensors couldn't track all operations simultaneously. We had to prioritize which battle zones to monitor. They moved with synchronized purpose across light years. Their fleets maintained formation despite vast distances. Ships in different systems executed complementary maneuvers without apparent communication. Their coordination suggested a level of strategic planning we couldn't comprehend. They fought not as separate units but as extensions of a single consciousness. Their logistics supported advances council planners called impossible. I studied their supply lines. They didn't use traditional reinforcement routes. Instead, they established mobile resupply points that moved with the front lines. Asteroid fortresses became forward operating bases. Captured Skorath facilities were immediately repurposed for human use. Their support network expanded faster than their advance. They operated on a strategic depth no species had achieved. Their awareness extended from individual ship maintenance schedules to galaxy-wide resource allocation. They coordinated production, deployment, and combat operations as a continuous process. Their strategic planning incorporated variables we hadn't considered relevant. They fought in 4 dimensions: space, time, production, and information. The Skorath weren't just losing, they were being erased. Their military capacity diminished with each passing hour. Their production facilities disappeared. Their supply networks evaporated. Their command structure fragmented. What remained wasn't an army. It was scattered elements without coordination or purpose. The humans weren't defeating them. They were systematically unmaking their ability to wage war. The process was methodical, comprehensive, and utterly final. The Skorath command center sounded the retreat too late. I intercepted their final coordinated transmission across 13 systems. Their orders showed classic containment patterns, fallback positions, regrouping protocols, defensive formations. Standard military doctrine for a fighting withdrawal. The problem was timing. Their communication reached frontline units as human forces were already breaching their positions. The delay measured 47 minutes. In human warfare, that's eternity. They attempted a last stand against overwhelming superiority. Their remaining fleet consolidated around their primary manufacturing hub. 2,700 vessels formed perfect geometric patterns, their traditional defensive formation. They created overlapping fields of fire, interlocking shield matrices and layered defensive perimeters. Textbook perfect, impeccable execution, and completely irrelevant against what was coming. Their formations broke against human tactical precision. I watched the engagement from a monitoring station 3 systems away. Human ships didn't attack the formation directly. They struck at the connections between vessels. They targeted communication relays between ships. They hit power transfer conduits between shield generators. They didn't break the formation. They dissolved its coherence. Ships that should have supported each other became isolated. Systems that should have reinforced instead failed. They underestimated human willingness to pursue total elimination. As the Skorath lines fractured, their commanders expected standard pursuit patterns. Limited engagement ranges, defined victory conditions, acceptable loss thresholds. Instead, human vessels pushed through damaged sectors without slowing. They didn't stop to secure positions or claim territory. They continued forward, hunting every surviving ship, every escape pod, every functioning system. The pursuit was absolute. Their belief in invincibility became their fatal weakness. I analyzed their final command decisions. They still operated on the assumption that technological superiority guaranteed survival, that their ships could withdraw under protection of advanced shields, that their speed could outrun pursuit. They didn't understand that human vessels were faster in short bursts, that human weapons could penetrate their shields through sustained concentrated fire, that human persistence would override technological advantages. They couldn't comprehend an enemy that fought without limits. The Skorath military tradition had rules: acceptable casualty ratios, defined victory conditions, recognized surrender protocols. Human warfare recognized only survival or extinction. Their vessels fought until destroyed. Their crews operated beyond fatigue limits. Their command structure authorized extreme measures without hesitation. The concept of too far didn't exist in their operational parameters. Their extermination focus was met with greater focus. The Skorath had built their civilization around the principle of absolute eradication. They eliminated threats completely, without exception, without reservation. They encountered a species that applied that same principle. The Skorath threat was eliminated, but something remained. I monitored the cleanup operations across 17 systems. Human vessels continued patrolling former battle zones, not as conquerors, but as maintenance crews. They disassembled wreckage with the same efficiency they'd shown in combat. Their presence didn't feel like occupation, it felt like ongoing problem management. The vacuum left by the Skorath wasn't filled with new rulers. It was filled with human oversight. Humanity's presence in galactic affairs became permanent. Their embassy on the Council homeworld expanded from a single office to an entire administrative complex. They didn't request additional privileges or special status. They simply established the infrastructure needed to monitor galactic stability. Their diplomats attended sessions without speaking, unless directly addressed. Their observers watched vote tallies without comment. Their silence spoke louder than any declaration could have. Their methods became the new standard for existential threats. Council military academies revised their entire curriculum. Strategy courses now included human historical conflicts from their pre-spaceflight era. Logistics training focused on rapid industrial conversion. Tactical simulations emphasized adaptation over technological superiority. The changes weren't optional. They were necessary for understanding the new reality of galactic security. Civilizations now understood the price of threatening human survival. I watched planetary governments update their risk assessment models. They considered human response patterns when evaluating military actions. They calculated not just immediate consequences, but long-term industrial and strategic implications. The equation had changed from, can we win this engagement, to, can we survive the solution? The Council's safety was ensured, but on human terms. Our defense treaties now included clauses we'd never previously considered. Human advisors participated in strategic planning sessions. Their auditors reviewed our military production capabilities. Their analysts accessed our threat assessment databases. The protection came with complete transparency requirements. We gained security but lost operational autonomy. Galactic warfare had been redefined around human capabilities. Engagement doctrines now emphasized numerical superiority over technological edge. Logistics planning prioritized production capacity over fleet quality. Victory conditions shifted from territorial control to threat elimination. The very language of conflict changed to incorporate human terminology and concepts. Their industrial and adaptive genius became legendary. I visited the renamed Military Academy of Adaptive Response on Xylos Prime. Cadets studied human industrial mobilization patterns alongside traditional tactics. They analyzed asteroid fortress designs alongside orbital defense theory. The instructors presented human capabilities not as anomalies but as achievable standards. The impossible had become the expected. The universe had witnessed what humans could do when pressed. The Skorath conflict became the primary case study in crisis response. Analysts from 17 species published papers on human behavioral patterns under extreme pressure. Their conclusions were unanimous. Humanity's true capacity only revealed itself when facing existential threats. Their normal state was preparation. Their activated state was transformation. They'd shown that survival wasn't about technology, it was about will. The evidence was undeniable. Human vessels were technically inferior to both Council and Skorath designs. Their weapons had shorter ranges, their shields lower capacity, their engines less efficiency. Yet they'd achieved total victory through determination, coordination, and relentless production. The lesson was clear. Technology enables, but will determines. The galaxy had gained protectors far more terrifying than any threat. I watched human patrol vessels moving through secured sectors. They didn't project power or display aggression. They simply existed as permanent reminders. Their presence said everything without speaking. Threats would be solved, problems would be eliminated, and survival would be ensured. The price of that protection was accepting that some solutions were absolute. The galaxy was safer, but it was also different. The rules had changed. The players had changed. The game itself had changed. Humanity didn't seek galactic domination. Their entire involvement stemmed from survival. I watched their civilian networks during the mobilization. Their media wasn't talking about conquest or expansion. They discussed home defense and species preservation. Their political leaders framed it as protecting Earth, not controlling the galaxy. The distinction was important. It meant their actions had limits. They would do whatever necessary to survive, but nothing more than necessary. Their legacy became one of ruthless efficiency when threatened. The after-action reports filled entire data archives. 73 systems secured, 4,800 Skorath vessels eliminated, 0 human casualties in the final offensive. The numbers told a story of perfect execution. They didn't achieve victory through brilliance or innovation. They achieved it through relentless, methodical problem-solving. They proved that primitive technology didn't mean primitive thinking. I studied their engineering solutions. Their ships used chemical propulsion while we had gravity drives. Their weapons fired physical projectiles while we used energy beams. Their shields were simple electromagnetic fields. Yet they made it all work through clever application and overwhelming numbers. Their advantage wasn't what they had. It was how they used it. Their willingness to go big when going home wasn't an option became their defining trait. I reviewed their resource allocation decisions. They committed 94% of their industrial capacity to the war effort. They redirected civilian infrastructure to military production. They accepted temporary economic collapse as acceptable collateral damage. The scale of their commitment was unprecedented in galactic history. Their pest control mentality against existential threats shaped their entire approach. I listened to their military briefings. They didn't discuss enemy capabilities or tactical advantages. They talked about infestation patterns and eradication protocols. The language was deliberate. It removed emotional considerations from military decisions. They weren't fighting beings, they were eliminating threats. Their ability to turn enemy strengths into their own advantages became legendary. The asteroid fortresses were the perfect example. They took the Skorath's own disassembly technology and used it against them. They captured enemy vessels and reverse-engineered them within hours. They learned from every engagement and implemented improvements immediately. Their adaptability was their greatest weapon. Their production capabilities that dwarfed advanced civilizations remain incomprehensible. Our economists still study their output graphs. They produced more tonnage of warships in 3 months than the entire Council had built in 3 centuries. Their manufacturing efficiency exceeded our theoretical maximums by 400%. The numbers didn't make sense according to our economic models. Yet the ships kept coming. Their information dominance through behavioral understanding changed intelligence work forever. I watched their analysts work. They didn't break codes or intercept communications. They studied patterns and predicted behaviors. They knew what the Skorath would do before the Skorath knew themselves. Their advantage wasn't technological. It was psychological. Their coordination across unimaginable distances and scales defied explanation. I monitored fleet movements across 15 light-years. Ships in different systems executed complementary maneuvers without communication delays. Their synchronization was perfect despite the vast distances involved. Our physicists still debate how they achieved such flawless coordination across relativistic distances. Their final message that redefined victory forever echoes through history. That simple transmission changed how we think about conflict. Victory wasn't about defeating enemies anymore, it was about solving problems. The concept of conditional surrender became outdated. The idea of negotiated peace seemed quaint. They introduced a new standard: complete resolution or nothing. The galaxy is still learning to live with that concept. Kaney's Tuesday comment became galactic military doctrine. I watched the transition happen in real time across council institutions. Strategy seminars started including the phrase in their curriculum. Tactical manuals added sections on human response patterns. The concept shifted from casual remark to formal terminology within standard months. It wasn't just a saying anymore. It was a classification for impossible situations requiring extreme adaptation. It represented human adaptability in impossible situations. I analyzed their historical records alongside current procedures. Their military tradition showed consistent patterns of overcoming technological disadvantages through sheer flexibility. They'd faced energy weapons with projectile firearms. They'd countered orbital bombardment with tunnel networks. They'd matched advanced armor with numerical superiority. The Tuesday Principle codified this approach into something teachable. Overwhelming odds became just another Tuesday for humanity. Their training simulations incorporated the concept directly. Cadets faced scenarios designed to be statistically unwinnable. The objective wasn't victory. It was demonstrating creative response under extreme pressure. I watched trainees develop solutions we'd consider rule violations. They didn't break regulations, they treated the regulations as part of the problem to be solved. The phrase entered council vocabulary as both warning and reassurance. Diplomats used it when discussing security threats. This could become a Tuesday situation meant preparing for worst-case scenarios. Military planners said, "We need Tuesday-level response protocols when facing new threats." The term carried dual meanings: grave warning about danger levels, but also confidence in available solutions. It symbolized human willingness to face certain annihilation. Their psychological profiling revealed unique trauma response patterns. Where other species showed panic or despair, humans displayed focused problem-solving. Their brain activity shifted from emotional centers to cognitive processing regions. They didn't experience fear shutdown. They experienced solution activation. The Tuesday Principle described this neurological switch. Their ability to treat existential threats as routine challenges became their defining trait. I monitored their civilian networks during the mobilization. Their media coverage treated galactic extinction as a technical problem. News programs discussed production quotas and resource allocation. Talk shows featured engineers explaining retrofit procedures. The tone wasn't apocalyptic. It was instructional. The psychological shift from fear to calculated response changed everything. Council security protocols had emphasized threat avoidance and risk minimization. Human methods focused on capability development and response preparation. They didn't try to prevent Tuesday situations. They built systems to handle them when they occurred. The difference was fundamental and transformative. The recognition that some species fight differently became essential knowledge. Military academies added comparative xenopsychology to core requirements. Commanders studied not just enemy capabilities, but enemy cognitive patterns. The understanding that different species approach conflict from different psychological frameworks changed strategic planning completely. Assumptions about universal combat psychology were discarded. The understanding that human normal wasn't galactic normal required adjustment. Their standard operational procedures violated 73 council regulations. Their rules of engagement would have court-martialed any council officer. Their definition of acceptable losses would have caused political upheaval. We had to accept that their normal was our extreme. The cultural translation took years. The day the galaxy learned what Tuesday really meant was never officially recorded. It happened gradually across different sectors at different times. For some, it was watching asteroid fortresses disassemble Skorath vessels. For others, it was seeing production numbers that defied physics. For me, it was hearing a human engineer describe planetary extinction as a logistics problem. That's when I understood. Tuesday wasn't a day. It was a capability. The galaxy learned that day that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology, but an unbreakable will to survive against any odds. I've watched civilizations rise and fall, but never one that treated extinction as a logistical puzzle. Their strength came from an ancient, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Remember that when you look at the stars tonight, Somewhere out there, humanity is having another Tuesday. They're solving problems, adapting, enduring, and the universe is better prepared because of it. Ambassador Quinn Durrell stepped onto Sol 3 with Council protocols. His shuttle settled on a cracked concrete pad that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Dust swirled around polished diplomatic boots as he adjusted his formal robes. The entire facility looked like a decommissioned industrial site, not a military headquarters. I watched through the shuttle's external sensors as he squared his shoulders, preparing to greet what the Council still called primitive leadership. General Marcus Caney greeted him with a ceramic cup and holograms. The general stood waiting outside a prefabricated structure, steam rising from his mug. No honor guard, no ceremonial welcome. Just a man in functional camouflage with a data pad in one hand and what smelled like coffee in the other. Holographic displays flickered around them, showing real-time fleet movements across 3 sectors. The general didn't offer refreshments or exchange formal greetings. The general asked for a blunt briefing, not diplomatic pleasantries. His first words were, "Skip the ceremonial nonsense." He took another sip from that ceramic cup while studying the ambassador's face. "We've read your data packet. Now tell me what your models didn't capture. No welcome to Earth, no appreciation for the honor of this visit. Just immediate focus on operational details." Durrell presented the situation with measured Council precision. He began with the standardized threat assessment format, citing probability matrices and historical precedents. His delivery was flawless Council rhetoric, balanced, calibrated, and utterly detached. He quoted casualty estimates with the same tone one might use reading atmospheric readings. Every sentence contained precisely calculated levels of gravitas and technical accuracy. Caney listened while studying tactical displays of Skorath advances. The general's eyes never left the holograms showing Skorath fleet formations. He watched enemy ships cutting through defensive lines with surgical precision. His fingers traced patterns in the air, zooming in on specific engagement sequences. The ceramic cup never left his hand, but his attention remained fixed on the unfolding destruction. The general's questions focused on practical military assessments. What's their refueling cycle duration? How many combat hours between maintenance periods? Do their commanders take tactical initiative or wait for centralized orders? He wanted numbers, patterns, behavioral data, not grand strategy or political context. The questions came rapid fire, each one digging deeper into operational realities the Council had considered secondary. He wanted Skorath capabilities, not political considerations. When Durrell began explaining inter-council diplomatic tensions, Caney held up a hand. "I don't care about your political problems. Tell me about their point defense targeting systems. How quickly do they adapt to new weapon signatures?" The shift was jarring, from galactic politics to weapon specifications without transition. The general's focus was absolute, singular, and completely devoid of diplomatic nuance. Durrell seemed surprised by the directness, the lack of ceremony. I watched his posture change as the meeting progressed. The formal diplomatic stiffness melted into something more alert, more tense. His translator device occasionally hesitated on military terminology the Council hadn't programmed into its databases. He kept glancing at the crude concrete structures around them as if expecting them to transform into something more appropriately impressive. Caney challenged why a primitive species should carry this burden. Near the end, the general finally looked directly at the ambassador. "You've got 12 advanced civilizations, generation ships, energy weapons, planetary shields. Why come to a species that still uses chemical rockets?" The question wasn't defensive, it was analytical. He was testing the Council's true level of desperation, measuring their tactical honesty against their diplomatic presentation. The ambassador left with more questions than answers. His shuttle lifted off exactly 47 minutes after landing. No ceremonial farewell, no exchange of gifts, just a crisp salute from the general and a return to studying holograms. I reviewed the ambassador's bio readings during transit back to orbit. His stress indicators showed confusion patterns I'd never seen in a senior diplomat. The Council's carefully structured reality had just encountered something entirely outside their models. The general didn't see impossible odds. He saw Tuesday. I reviewed his briefing notes after the ambassador departed. Every Skorath capability, their fleet size, their weapons range, their advanced speed, had neat annotations beside them. not expressions of concern but tactical observations. He'd circled their refueling patterns and written, "Standard envelopment vulnerability in margins." Where we saw annihilation, he saw operational parameters, overwhelming enemy forces. Technically superior adversary? His staff meeting that evening focused entirely on logistics. Not how to match Skorath technology, but how to outproduce it. The conversation drifted to industrial capacity, resource allocation, workforce mobilization. They discussed retooling automobile factories for warship production. One colonel mentioned something called Rosie the Riveter, and everyone nodded. Historical precedent, not science fiction. No mercy expected or given. Standard human warfare. Kaney's historical briefing packet contained conflicts we'd classified as primitive squabbles. Wars where casualties numbered in millions. Battles where soldiers fought without energy shields or medical nanites. Their entire military tradition was built on what we'd call atrocity conditions. The general's assessment called it acceptable loss parameters within historical norms. Kaney reframed galactic extinction as a human problem. His transition team started calling it the home invasion scenario. They stopped talking about saving civilizations and started discussing home defense. The language shift was deliberate. Every briefing, every memo, every strategic assessment used terminology from planetary protection doctrine. They weren't fighting for the galaxy. They were defending their backyard. Go big or go home, he said, and home was about to be invaded. I watched his planning team work through the night. They had maps of Earth's industrial centers beside star charts of Skorath advance routes. The connection was explicit. If Skorath reached human space, they'd treat Earth like every other world. There would be no negotiation, no surrender terms. The option was victory or eradication. His dry wit masked a terrifying military realism. That ceramic cup never left his hand during planning sessions. He'd sip coffee while discussing planetary-scale bombardment scenarios. The calmness wasn't bravado. It was professional detachment. He treated galactic annihilation like an engineering problem that needed solving. The equations were complex, but the solution existed if you looked at it correctly. The council expected desperation. They got calculation. Our psychologists had predicted panic responses, denial mechanisms, maybe bargaining behavior. Instead, we received spreadsheets, production timelines, resource allocation matrices. The human response wasn't emotional, it was operational. They weren't reacting to a threat. They were implementing a solution. Kaney saw patterns where others saw certain defeat. His analysts identified 17 points of Skorath operational vulnerability within the first 24 hours. Their perfect mathematical precision created predictable patterns. Their avoidance of improvisation meant they couldn't handle truly novel tactics. Their technological superiority made them resistant to adaptation. The general's team built their entire strategy on exploiting systemic rigidity. Human adaptability wasn't a trait. It was their weapon. I watched them test prototypes that shouldn't have worked. Hybrid systems combining their primitive technology with captured Skorath components. They didn't try to understand the underlying science, they focused on making things function. Their engineering philosophy was brutal in its simplicity. If it works, deploy it. If it fails, try something else. The ambassador realized they hadn't asked for help. They'd unleashed something. His final report to the council contained a warning we should have heeded. He described a species that treated existential threats as logistical challenges. A civilization that measured response not by what was fair, but by what was necessary. His conclusion was Jandanjube. We hadn't recruited allies. We had activated a mechanism. And mechanisms don't stop when the problem is solved. They wait for the next problem. The Galactic Council called us primitive. They said we were mudball bipedal primates with chemical propulsion. Then they asked for our help against the Skorath. I watched General Kaney sip from his ceramic cup and tell them, "You just described every war my species has ever fought. We call it Tuesday." What happened next redefined victory for the entire galaxy. I sat in the council chambers when the final vote was cast. The air processors hummed a nervous frequency I'd never heard before. You could see the weight of it on every senator's face. That moment when desperation overrides generations of protocol. 47 systems gone in months. Entire fleets reduced to cosmic dust. We watched the tactical displays show systems blinking out one by one. Each lost world represented millions of lives, centuries of culture. Whole civilizations erased without trace. The Skorath advance didn't leave ruins. It left perfect empty space where planets used to be. Senators argued we were inviting barbarians to a civilized extinction. The debate lasted 14 standard hours. I remember old Senator Vorlin shaking his head, saying we'd be trading one predator for another. He called it the ultimate act of galactic desperation, asking the wolves to guard the sheep. The intelligence director's logic was cold, desperate, and terrifyingly simple. He stood at the podium without notes. His analysis showed Earth's military history demonstrated exactly the kind of relentless survival instinct we lacked. He didn't recommend humans. He presented them as the only statistical anomaly that might disrupt Skorath patterns. They called Earth a mud ball with bipedal primates using chemical propulsion. The dismissive language was deliberate. Counselors needed to believe they weren't truly asking for help from equals. They had to frame it as scraping the bottom of the galactic barrel. The terminology committee actually debated the precise wording for 3 hours. I remember the palpable terror in the chamber's atmospheric sensors. The bio readings spiked so high the system issued 2 emergency alerts. Fear chemicals hung in the recycled air like poison. You could taste the collective anxiety, metallic and sharp on the tongue. Council aides moved through the aisles with atmospheric stabilizers. They voted to contact Sol 3 with minimal protocols and maximum hope. The transmission would bypass standard diplomatic channels. No cultural briefings, no first contact specialists. Just a raw data dump of our situation and a simple plea for assistance. The vote passed by 1 margin, the slimmest majority in council history. Hope that we'd be too primitive to understand their request. Some senators actually prayed the translation systems would fail. They wanted the message to arrive as meaningless noise. The language department deliberately used complex technical terms alongside basic concepts, creating what they called controlled confusion. Hope that we'd refuse to face certain annihilation. The probability models gave human intervention a 0.3% chance of success. The War Committee calculated we'd get either outright refusal or immediate surrender. They anticipated panic, denial, maybe even attempts to negotiate with the Skorath directly. That hope would become their first lesson in human nature. What we got wasn't refusal or confusion. We got a response within 6 hours. No diplomatic pleasantries, no requests for clarification. Just 7 words, message received. Stand by for further instructions. The council chambers went absolutely silent when that transmission arrived. Nobody had predicted that particular outcome. The Skorath didn't conquer systems, they erased them. I watched entire civilizations disappear from tactical displays without leaving debris fields. Their process wasn't invasion. It was systematic deletion of everything that made a world alive. Atmosphere processors, orbital stations, even planetary magnetic fields, all stripped away until only bare rock remained. Their war machines turned vibrant worlds into parking lots for their fleets. I studied the after-action reports from Kepler 186f. That world had 17 billion inhabitants and orbital gardens that spanned continents. The Skorath left it flat, gray, and geometrically perfect, a barren surface exactly sized for their destroyer-class vessels. They didn't occupy territory. They manufactured landing zones on planetary scales. I studied their tactics from secure observation posts. We had sensor drones hidden in asteroid fields 7 systems deep behind their advance. Their movements followed patterns so precise we could predict their next target with 99.8% accuracy. The problem wasn't forecasting their actions, it was stopping them once they began. They moved with mathematical precision, leaving no survivors. Their cleanup operations deployed nanite swarms that identified and eliminated biological signatures down to microbial levels. Their records showed 0 prisoners taken across 47 systems. When they finished with a world, not even bacteria remained in the soil. Their technology was generations beyond council capabilities. Our energy shields shattered against their primary beams. Their armor absorbed our strongest plasma charges without registering damage. The Tech Analysis Division estimated we were fighting weapons developed over 800 years beyond our current level. Our engineers called it trying to stop a starship with stone tools. They dismantled defenses like children taking apart toys. I watched the fall of the Yilthari Ring, a defensive station that took 3 centuries to build. The Skorath didn't blast through it. They sent precision cutters that sliced the installation into standardized segments for recycling. The entire process took 14 minutes. Their extermination focus was absolute, their mercy non-existent. They didn't respond to surrender broadcasts or distress signals. Their communication systems had no receiving capability, only transmission. Their ships moved through space as silent, perfect instruments of eradication. No warnings, no demands, no negotiations. 12 advanced species couldn't slow their advance. The Vorlons had gravity weapons that could crush moons. The Keth employed temporal distortion fields. The Xylos could shift entire fleets through quantum tunnels. None of it mattered. The Skorath adapted to each new threat within hours, then turned their opponent's technology against them. The Skorath believed they were inevitable, unstoppable, eternal. Their transmissions, when they bothered to send any, spoke of completing the Great Cleansing and finalizing the galactic pattern. They saw themselves as cosmic janitors removing imperfect life forms from the universe. Their confidence wasn't arrogance. It was mathematical certainty built on 47 successful system eradications. They were about to learn the meaning of error. Their models accounted for technological advancement, numerical superiority, even psychic warfare. Their predictive algorithms contained data on 12,000 intelligent species. But they had no category for a species that treated impossible odds as routine. No variable for a civilization that saw annihilation not as a threat, but as a problem to be solved through sheer industrial determination.